Our inaugural session will be moderated by Ambassador Gautam Bambawale. I welcome to the stage our distinguished chair and panelists, His Excellency Mr. Ibrahim Amir, the Honorable Minister of Finance from the Maldives, His Excellency Mr. Leonpo Namgai Shering, the Honorable Finance Minister of the Royal Government of Bhutan, and His Excellency Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Honorable Minister for External Affairs, Government of India. Welcome. Welcome once again. Ambassador Bambawale, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So what we thought was that instead of having speeches as normally happens at other conferences, this inaugural session will be more in the form of a discussion with all three ministers from India, from Bhutan, as well as from the Maldives. And perhaps if I may start with Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable External Affairs Minister of India. You know, the title of this particular conference is Asia in the Emerging World Order. So one of the underlying assumptions is that there is some change taking place in the world order. As Dr. Mashelkar said in his opening remarks, the 3 C's, and sir, you have mentioned this in your remarks earlier too in your speeches, that the 3 C's of COVID, conflict and climate have impacted the world and have shocked the world, provided shocks to the world. But sir, what I'd like to ask you is that in this background, and as you sit in Delhi, what are the 3 most important things, themes, which go through your mind? What are the 3 most important things which animate your mind in your day-to-day work? Dr. Jaishankar, please.
Right now?
Yes.
Well, if I were to pick 3 big issues in the forefront of my thoughts, one, I would actually reflect on our neighborhood. Neighborhood, partly because we are the neighborhood, the 3 of us. You know, we have an approach since 2014 called Neighborhood First. You know, it's the neighborhood itself has seen a sea change. I'm not sure it's something which people in our own country fully understand and appreciate. I think the neighborhood perhaps does more than we ourselves do. So to me, the neighborhood first would be one big, I would say, concern, focus, thought, call it what you will. The second would be the state of the world, you know. Would be the state of the world. I think the 3 C's is a very snappy summing up of the problems, which is COVID, conflict, and climate. You know, and climate is increasingly an operational problem, not just an existential one, because you know, we can see already that climate is creating disruptions to the routine economic, you know, routine operations of the global economy. But it's not obviously enough to say I got a 3C problem. You got to have a solution. And I think the solution is also a kind of a 3C solution, which is that somewhere there has to be a degree of creativity, a sense of caution about this world we are entering to. And finally, I think that the world is suffering today from credibility issues. So to me, there are 3 C's as a problem, there are probably 3 C's as some kind of solution. And the third is the G20 presidency. It's a very important responsibility at a very critical moment. and I think there are a lot of expectations from India. And we too must look at the world and see how we can use it to enhance global awareness, which is very important for India if it is to develop the mindset of a rising power. So those would be my slightly long-winded answers, which is really neighborhood first, state of the world, and G20.
Thank you. Perhaps I could ask the same question to Honorable Linpo, the Finance Minister of Bhutan. Sir, as you sit in Thimphu and when you go to your office every day, what are the three major things or three major topics or three major issues which, animate your thinking, which have your attention on a day-to-day basis? Linpo, if I could request you to take that question, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Bambawali. First of all, my greetings and very good evening to all the distinguished participants here. And my apologies for exposing my leg, because this is where the very concept of GNH is ingrained. So I think probably some of the distinguished delegates might not have seen the costume that we are used to wearing in Bhutan as a part of our national dress. Anyways, coming back to the topic, I think for Bhutan as a small developing nation, challenged with the topographical difficulties, and I mean to say we are landlocked, and especially because of the COVID, in the post-pandemic world, the three important aspects that actually lingers around my mind, that actually disturbs me, and sometimes I see that as an opportunity to grow from strength to strength, but sometimes I see that as a troublemaker for the small developing nation like Bhutan. And the first and the foremost is the geopolitical tensions around the world, and case in point, the ongoing Ukraine war, which has actually impacted and severely disrupted the supply chain. And this has actually resulted in Bhutan as a small economy, and most importantly, we being largely an import-driven economy, we are susceptible to, the injected form of an inflation, and which has caused macroeconomic imbalances. And this is a serious concern that we don't see an upfront intervention or response to that. But I think having a dear neighbor with a lot of economic resilience and a lot of innovations like India, I think we are very much positive that the growth in India will directly or indirectly translate or have a cascading effect into a smaller economy like us. Second aspect that I see is the climate change. I think climate change has become a kind of a universal the phenomenon, the challenge, whether the country is sea-locked or landlocked. And for instance, in Bhutan, we always say that, we always praise ourselves saying that we are not only carbon neutral, but we are carbon negative. That's the fact. We have a forest coverage of 72%. And our constitution mandates that forest coverage should be maintained at all times at 60%. But having said that, I think if the partners across the world doesn't play their equal roles and responsibilities, and doesn't keep up their woods, I think smaller nations cannot make much difference. The biggest challenge for Bhutan, because of the climate change effect, is the glacial lake outburst. We are highly susceptible and vulnerable to gulf. And third important aspect that actually bothers me day-on-day basis is the widening trade deficit. That's also a macroeconomic imbalance. So basically, we are, I think, India being our largest trading partner, with the presence of Honorable Minister, Honorable S. Jaishankar here, India has been doing a wonderful, facilitating in every sphere for Bhutan. But further, I think there are scopes where, country like Bhutan needs to actually discuss and dive deeper into understanding a lot of problems along the borders with regard to non-tariff barriers. So that I thought that I will be raising at a different level with the honorable ministers from Government of India and of course with the honorable S. Jaishankar here. So these are three important aspects that I see that for a small landlocked country like Bhutan, if we don't find a solution, a prominent solution, which of course should be sustainable, I think post-pandemic recovery will be an uphill task for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Last but not the least, let me turn to the Honorable Finance Minister of the Maldives, His Excellency Mr. Ibrahim Amir, and ask him the same question. Mr. Minister, what are the three things which are at the top of your mind when you go to work every day in Malé?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to really thank the Pune International Center and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from India for giving me this opportunity. It gives me great pride in sharing the stage with Honorable Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and as well Minister of Finance from Bhutan, a dear friend of mine. As the Minister of Finance, the way I think about these three things at the current point of time may be vastly different from others. Everyone here will know Maldives as a destination for sun, sand, and the sea. But I believe we have a lot to offer. Maldives is not a poor country. Maldives now is a upper middle income country. And as the Minister of Finance, Ambassador, the three things that really bothers me right now is actually, as mentioned, number one, climate change. As you know, Maldives is very much prone to the effects of climate change. Our very existence is threatened by the changes in climate change. And a large part of our budget is spent on climate adaptation and climate mitigation efforts. And if you look at the numbers from 2011 till now, we have spent around $587 million on climate mitigation and climate adaptation projects. And also, if you look at our main sectors that drive our economy, it is mainly based on our natural resources, which is the tourism, and also the fisheries sector. So the climate adaptation and climate mitigation efforts. Maldives is very low lying, and why it bothers me is that so far we have not been able to tap into the climate finances, cheap climate finances that is being pledged by the developed countries in several COP meetings. So because of that, we are forced to go to the markets, borrow at a higher cost, and then make sure our islands are there for the tourists to come, and we are there. The other thing is, second thing is the external shocks. Namely, very recently we have the COVID, and now we have the war in Ukraine. During COVID, as you know, Maldives is very much reliant on tourism, and we closed our borders for 3 months, and our economy declined by around 33%. Maldives was one of the worst hit countries during COVID, but it really showed the resilience of our tourism sector, that we were also one of the countries that rebounded very strongly in 2021 and even 2022. And now we have surpassed where we were in 2019, and our tourism sector is faring better than we were in 2019. And also, as the Minister of Finance, I am also always thinking about the developmental challenges. All the more important because during COVID, our GDP declined, our government revenue declined, and our debt situation also got worsened. And we cannot delay development. We cannot have 10, 15 years for water and sanitation projects, climate adaptation projects. So how do we make sure that we have developmental projects and then also be mindful of our fiscal sustainability and also our debt sustainability issues? So in short, number one, climate change. Number two, the external shocks, the COVID and also the Ukraine war. I would also like to highlight, because of the Ukraine-Russia war, the small island nations like the Maldives and I believe the Bhutan, also in most of the countries, because of the increase in oil prices, increase in food prices, it really affected our fiscal space. So that is also a very worrying aspect of this war. And thirdly, the developmental efforts. How do we make sure that there is continuation of our developmental projects? Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Jaishankar, if I could ask you to elaborate on India's approach to its presidency of the G20. What are the major themes that we want to take up? I saw from some of the recent developments that we want to voice the opinions of the Global South. If you could talk a little bit to that issue. Also, in different cities of India, we have felt the impact of the G20. It is one of the objectives of this government to take the G20 to different parts of India. And we've had one meeting at least, if not more, here in Pune, and we saw how it did positively impact Pune at that time. So could I request you to talk a little more about India's ideas behind its presidency of the G20?
Gautam, let me do one thing. Let me take it in three parts. How are we going about the G20 presidency? Number two, what you said about the voice of the Global South. And three, what are our expectations of what's going to come out of the G20. I would say on the first one, the G20 today, it began out in 2008 as a very immediate response to the global financial crisis. I think many of you are very intimately familiar with it. And over a period of time with each G20 presidency, more and more layers and facets were added to it. So, environment got in, health got in, foreign policy got in, business got in, youth. So today there are actually 15 tracks, 15 ministerial tracks. The heart of the G20 is still very much finance. It's still very much finance, it's still very much development. The mandate of the G20 is really growth and development. Now, how are we going to go about it? Because it has developed so many aspects, facets, there are roughly about 200 meetings which any president, any country which is holding the presidency has to organize in the space of that year. So when we started thinking about it, Prime Minister had, this thought that it should not be a capital-centric exercise, nor should it be, a mice industry exercise. So you don't want people to get off the plane, go to the meeting, do the hotel dinner, get on a plane and go back. And you don't want them to do Delhi and, maybe Agra, Jaipur and say, okay, I've seen India, I've had 3 pictures and I'm done. The idea was, this is an opportunity for the world to get to know India better. So get people to travel to every province of India, to different cities of India, cities which are not, and towns which are not normally used to hosting international conventions and meetings. Obviously there's a kind of a threshold, they should have the infrastructure to deal with it. And the advantage of doing this is, considering there are 200 meetings and, each one of them will have at the very least a few hundred delegates and officials who will come. Just look at the total number of people who will actually be visiting us from foreign countries in that year. And these are, in today's parlance, in their respective societies, they're all influencers of every kind. So you have actually, by spreading it across the country, this is a kind of a marketing of India to the influential people of those 20 countries and changing their thinking, exposing India to them, exposing India in every sense, the cultural diversity, the socio-economic changes which are taking place, the energy and the sort of enthusiasm today among people, the cuisine, the arts, the music. So that's one side of it. The other side is also, every time a town or a city or a university or a institution, they host such a meeting. Now, I've come from earlier in the day to Symbiosis, and they are hosting the Youth 20 meeting. Now, for them, it's a big deal. Everybody is excited about it. Everybody is getting prepared about it. Some months ago, I went to Imphal. Now, all we did, as part of what was their major festival, we actually opened what was a G20 photo booth kind of. There was a logo with, leaves on all sides. You stand out there, but the amount of interest in Imphal, because that sense, something is coming our way, we're going to be part of it. Yeah. This too is part of developing an awareness in the country about the world. And we should do that. We need to do that. We are actually behind the curve. We are today the 5th largest economy in the world. We will be the 3rd largest economy very soon. But if you look at our significance to the global workplace, and I have somebody like Dr. Narayan Murthy sitting in front of me, our significance to the global workplace is actually going to grow enormously, because there's a fundamental mismatch of the demand and supply when it comes to talent and skills today, and countries in a knowledge economy are willing to take bold steps to fix it. So, as we say, this is getting the world India ready, is getting India world ready, and that's the way this whole thing is being planned. Now, Voice of the Global South. Why do we need Voice of the Global South? Because what we saw in the last year, and it's something which we had seen not with the same degree of disquiet, but especially last year it was very evident to us, which is one big problem was taking up all the oxygen. And the second order, third order consequences of that, those were not being adequately sort of appreciated. If you heard, our 2 finance ministers sitting here, what is their concern? They are talking today of the external shocks which is creating fiscal stress on them, because their oil prices are going up, their food prices are going up. They're worrying whether the fertilizer prices, in fact, will the fertilizer be accessible apart from being affordable. So we felt that it was important that the entirety of global problems be put at the center of G20, not just one particular issue, and however important that issue might be. And secondly, that if there is one country among the G20, which the global South trusts us, whatever you might say. There is that sense, and that sense, by the way, has been heightened by Vaccine Maitri. That if you go to Africa today, to the Caribbean, to parts of Asia and say, people say, yeah, you know, there's India at least, okay, that guy will voice our worries. So, but we didn't want to do it with a sense of presumption that you know, we speak for everybody. We wanted a consultative process. So in fact, very painstakingly last month, we did consultations. This was the Prime Minister himself, myself, Finance Minister, Trade Minister, Environment Minister. We spoke to 125 countries at our level. And today, and the basic conversation was G20 is going to happen, so tell us what is your concern. You know, what is it? And then you kind of make a distillate of that and articulate it. And I think it's important today, not just in the G20. I think part of the problems even with the UN and the UN Security Council is that the voice of Global South is missing. If there is a logical, shall I say, candidate for that responsibility, it is us. We would be shirking our duty if we didn't do that. Now, what will happen out of the G20? Look, it's a bit early because we have to, I think tomorrow the finance ministers meeting, physical meeting is taking place. The foreign ministers meeting is on the 1st and 2nd of March. We will have to go through a set of meetings to see what happens at G20 is a lot of things are on slow boil. Okay. Now, which one of them gets cooked in one particular year is difficult to predict. You know, it has to be decided amongst the G20. But there are a set of issues, and I would like to reassure both our colleagues that green finance is really right, absolutely on top of the issues. I mean, today if you ask me 3 big issues in the world, I would put really green finance because I'm not putting green growth, because I think without finance, people talk about growth, but they seem to think that ambitions should be divorced from resources. The reality is we haven't moved that far ahead because the resources were not there. So I think this will take a little while to emerge, probably really till the summit in September.
Thank you, Minister. The Maldives and Bhutan are both part of the Global South. So let me start by asking the Honorable Finance Minister of the Maldives, Mr. Minister, what are your expectations at this point of time as the world is exiting the COVID pandemic, as we look for greater growth, as your fiscal space shrinks, as you rightly said? What are your expectations from the G20? And so let me request the Honorable Finance Minister of the Maldives to go first, and then request Honorable Finance Minister of Bhutan to answer the same question.
Thank you very much. I believe for countries like Maldives, it is very important in order to address the issues of climate change that we have cheaper financing available. At the moment, we also have to make sure that we carry out developmental projects. During COVID, you saw that because of the decline in GDP, our debt to GDP numbers went up to around 150%. Now again, because increase in tourist arrivals, tourism sector is faring better than expected, our GDP is also now increasing. So we see that the debt numbers are also coming down. In order to make sure that we have fiscal space and also carry out developmental projects, we need climate financing which is cheaper. But so far during different COP meetings, around $100 billion have been pledged, but we have not been able to tap into this climate financing and use this financing to make sure that we are able to use this funding for very important climate adaptation projects and mitigation projects for countries like the Maldives. And in the Maldives, it is always an emergency. We cannot wait 1-2 years for the project to documentation to be complete, and after 2-3 years we get the funding. And when we get the funding, the island is not there anymore. 20-30% of our islands are eroded by, if we don't do anything for let's say 2-3 years. So it is always an emergency situation, and we are forced to use our budgets, our own domestic resources to make sure that we have climate adaptation measures like building coastal protection, like building the harbors as well. So I believe at the top of the G20 agenda, the issue of climate financing, green financing is very important. And now I have had various discussions with other multilateral organizations like IMF, World Bank and others as well. Green financing, climate financing or any other financing, there is no differentiation. Even with climate financing, there are a lot of conditions. And I believe there shouldn't be any conditions with climate financing. The only thing should be that it should be earmarked for climate adaptation projects and climate mitigation projects. If you look at, let's say, for example, what is the rating of the country and what are the macroeconomic fundamentals, and then make available this climate financing, I believe it defeats the problem. Because we are planning to go to the market and issue green and blue bonds, but green, blue, or any other color you give, this financing does not differentiate with any conventional financing, because at the end of the day we get the same rates as any conventional financing. So I believe there should be some kind of an architecture mechanism where mostly climate vulnerable nations and more importantly small island developing states who are at the forefront of climate change should be able to get cheaper climate financing, and it should be yesterday and not today or tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could turn to you, Linpo, and ask you the same question, what are Bhutan's expectations from the G20?
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gautam. First of all, let me take this opportunity to congratulate India under the leadership of Shri Narendra Modi ji for for taking the presidency of the G20, and of course for Honorable Prime Minister for assuming the chair of the G20. I think before I jump onto the expectation, I would like to, with conviction, I would like to glaringly make a mention here that Bhutan personally doesn't have an inch of doubt with the capability of India to chair this world premier forum, bringing world leaders and the thinkers to deliberate on the world orders. And my special congratulations also goes to you, sir, for your leadership in that. When it comes to G20, I think the only expectation as a small developing nation would be, because I see that whatever agenda is tabled for G20, probably unlike the past G20, especially after the pandemic, the whole perception and the perspective to how you look at the problem has changed. Because pandemic has brought in a lot of new perceptions, new innovations, the way we think, the way we conduct our businesses. So for that matter, I think probably the core emphasis of the upcoming G20 summit in India in September will basically, I assume in that manner, the way Honorable External Affairs Minister was making a mention, that it will be more focused on the post-pandemic recovery, irrespective of the size of the country. Again, we don't have a doubt on India that by representing the Global South, I think it also represents our voice. So for that matter, I think the major concern for us as a small developing nation will be the debt distress in medium to long term. So for that matter, I think our expectation, and as well you can describe as our request, will be to look into relaxing the global financial conditions, because with the tightening global financial conditions, I think it is incurring a lot of, imposing a lot of challenge on us, which we don't actually on our own don't find a solution to that. And the second would be, I think, because we need to understand that other than the pandemic, where actually the problem has emerged, where the problem has erupted, because we never expected a Ukraine war. So for that matter, I think G20 is a platform as well, beyond economic discussions, dialogues. I think it is also, I perceive that it is also a forum for the global leaders to discuss on global peace, prosperity and stability, through which everything comes into order. And the third point that I expect would be, as rightly mentioned by Honorable External Affairs Minister, on the green financing, which is a very, very pertinent topic for a country like Bhutan, because of our the efforts that we made in conserving the nature. So we see this as an opportunity, as a means to meet the fiscal deficit, and also to address the fiscal instability issues. Because when you talk about innovative financing, we only think about issuance of green bond. But this being a new concept, I think if this could be taken forward, and I think we see a lot of opportunities to leverage on that. And lastly, but not the least, the expectation. I think this goes as a wish list, a long list from my side, but nevertheless, I see that when we actually access the global financing, be it from the multilateral development banks or bilateral partners, I think the conditions where we access the financing, I think irrespective of the size of the economy, irrespective of the size of the country, the conditions are I would see that often is the same. So basically in G20 forum, because G20 members also largely represent in the World Bank, ADB and other MDBs. So we see that if there is an opportunity as to represent the voice of South, Global South, if there is an opportunity for a smaller nations to have better concessional conditions to access the global financing. So these are, like basically, it goes like a shopping list, but I think if you really dive deeper into it and understand, probably these are the critical issues that can really give a prominent facelift for the smaller economies like us to recover in a sustainable manner in a post-pandemic world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linpo. Honorable Minister Jaishankar, you mentioned neighborhood first, and my question to you would be that previous governments also placed a lot of importance on our neighborhood, on our region, on our South Asian region. But is there something that your government is doing which is different from earlier? Have we moved into a higher gear where our neighborhood is concerned? I would request you to talk a little bit about our neighborhood and how we are helping not just countries like the Maldives and Bhutan who are present here today, but also other neighbors.
Gautam, you and I have been in this business a long time, and a long time over multiple governments. So even though I'm in politics today and you lead a more happier existence, the fact is there are real changes, and I don't think these are not necessarily political points that anybody is scoring. No question, that after 2014, there has been a really profound transformation in the way in which India has approached its neighbors. And as I said, a lot of it is because actually you can say it's the Indian leadership, the Indian system, whatever. We have gone back to the basics and asked ourselves the question, what kind of relationship do we want with our neighbors? So if you ask me what has changed, I would say, look, if you use the metrics of connectivity, of projects, of different kinds of developmental partnership expressions. So one part of it is what is it we are doing? Another part is how are we doing it? And the third is really the sweeping scale of what we are doing. And finally, that sense that today our fortunes are all tied together. I would honestly, very, very objectively say by each of these metrics, there's actually been a big change in a decade. And let me illustrate that. Okay. Let me, for example, point to Maldives. Today, if you have in Maldives a very major connectivity project, like the Greater Malay Connectivity Project, we've never done a project of that scale in our neighborhood. In fact, we've never done a project of that scale anywhere in the world. If you were to, again, I was there a few weeks ago laying the foundation stone of an airport lengthening project we're doing, because we do realize that by modernizing that airport, giving it greater capacity, a whole new set of islands now have access to international tourism in a way in which they didn't, and that very directly feeds into the GDP. So that one airport project actually has an enormous multiplier effect on their economy. Now, I'm giving you two big examples, but there are examples. We had these in the south, in Addu. There are a whole set of practical development projects of a community kind, which actually people appreciate. When they think of international cooperation, it's a nice word, but if that means that they've just got a water purification plant or a electricity connection or better roads or a sewage system, it means the world to them. Now, that's what's happening there. Now, to differing degrees, in every one of our neighboring countries. Again, I'm just using, since you asked this question, a decade as a differential. We are today supplying electricity to our neighbors, except Bhutan, from whom we are buying electricity. And now, by the way, we have started to buy electricity from Nepal as well. Now, to my mind, giving them, selling them electricity is very important because they need it. Buying electricity from them is equally important because it's a regular revenue source for them. So, and now that's only possible if we, along with them, build the grid connectivity. A second example, many of our neighbors were actually paying much higher prices for their energy. Nepal was a very prime example because energy, petrol and diesel used to be trucked in. Now, when we built this pipeline from Motihari to Amleganj, it's brought down prices of fuel very, very significantly in Nepal. We built roads in the what are called the Terai roads, the Hulaki roads out there. They were there. We've sort of modernized them, broadened them. The moment you get much broader roads, there's a clear both a supply chain and a economic benefit that comes. Now, I can give you a Bangladeshi variant of it. You can see it in roads, you can see it in rails, you can see it in access to ports, in waterways. So the entire neighborhood actually in the last 10 years today has started to realize, frankly, that India is prepared to put its money where its mouth is. that these are not just sermons and homilies on good neighbor relationship that we give out. It is backed by very solid cooperation projects, and I think, Minister, you would bear me out. I mean, in the case of Bhutan as well. I mean, even in this period of the last decade, we've had actually a new hydro, Mangdechu has come on stream hydro project. We are looking at some very big health commitments, at educational commitments. So at one level today, the neighborhood actually believes that India has a non-reciprocal, I would say a collective view, a regional view of the neighborhood, where the prosperity of India, the resources of India, are actually a lifting tide for the entire neighborhood. They also know, as you can see from the Sri Lankan experience, that if, God forbid, something really catastrophic happens, that India is there. That India is there in a macroeconomic sense, but India is also there, by the way, in case, you have a climate event, or they had some oil spills and things like that. So go around look, we've all done this beat for many years. Today, when you do this beat, you hear very, very different feedback about India. And it's also reflected in, their own shall I say, enthusiasm for, even in business, today in getting closer. So, again, I do not make this so much as a political point, but I do say that greater a vision of a region, a very clear direction from the top, that look, please approach the neighbors generously, non-reciprocally, credibly, do it on the ground, follow it up, look to see what is important for them. Try and do things which will impact, the lives of the people. All this, I think, has really paid off.
Thank you. I must ask you a follow-up question, Minister Jaishankar, and my audience, I know, wants me to ask you this question, that in our whole neighborhood first policy, there's one country to which you sent me as Ambassador or High Commissioner to our West, called Pakistan, with which we have nothing to do, which we are doing nothing about. So, at this point of time when Pakistan is going through some economic difficulties, do you think this is a point when there can be some kind of rapprochement between India and Pakistan?
Look, obviously it's in nobody's interest that any country, least of all a neighboring country, get into severe economic difficulties. Nobody sensible, nobody mature would even nurse that thought. But it's an equal fact that when any country gets into a serious economic problem, that country has to make policy choices and governance decisions to get themselves out of it. Another country, neighbor or non-neighbor or another institution, others cannot solve a problem if you're not prepared to solve it yourself. So let's be clear on the first point, which is that the solution, this is not a Pakistan point, it's a generic global point. Any country in deep economic difficulties has to come out of it through, what the world can do is to provide options and support systems. But the bottom line has to be done by that country, and often it will require very tough choices. Now, I want all of us to remember, we went through this 30 years ago. So it's not something which happens to other people. It also happened to us. It happened to us not once. It happened to us maybe not with the same severity at various other points of time in our modern history as well. But having said that, the reality of this particular relationship is that it has a fundamental issue which we cannot and we must not avoid. And that issue is that of terrorism. Because the moment you start doing these walkarounds, that, let's find a joint statement which will which will get us agreed language. Let us reach out at this point and see where this goes. That's been the talk of the last 75 years. And look where it got us. So I think we need clarity and we mustn't be in denial of what are very fundamental problems in that relationship. And just as, a country has to fix its economic issues, a country has to fix its political issues too. A country has to fix its social issues. No country is ever going to come out of a difficult situation and become a prosperous power if its basic industry is terrorism. So among the changes which need to be made are also changes pertaining to all of that. So I think that remains a very major problem. I also think, as today, as someone in politics, if I were to look at any big decision I'm making, I would also look at what is the public sentiment. I would have a pulse. What do my people feel about it? And I think you know the answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me say that we are going to, slowly, I'm going to turn to the two honorable ministers from both Bhutan and the Maldives. But after that round of questions, we're going to open it up to the floor. So please keep your questions ready. Let there be questions, short, to the point. But we are coming there. So let me first turn to Linpo Namgyet Sering. And, Honorable Minister Jaishankar spoke about how India is providing development assistance in its neighborhood. Could you expound on how India and Bhutan are working together on developmental partnership between our two countries?
Thank you. I think more than me, I think Ambassador Gautam, you are in Bhutan, so you must be knowing everything excellent, exactly. And I'm very proud to make a mention here that the former diplomatic, through the establishment of the mission office, which was later upgraded into the embassies in Delhi as well as in Thimphu, I think since 1961, when we started our first developmental plan, just like in India, you have a cycle of 5-year development plan. We started our 5-year developmental plan from 1961. So the two subsequent plans, the first 5-year plan and second 5-year plan were fully financed by government of India. So I think that in itself shows the kind of an instrumental role, kind of a facilitating role the government of India has played in shaping the developmental activities in the country, in Bhutan. Indeed, when the third king, His Majesty King Jigme Dorji Wangchuck, on the invitation of Honorable Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, he visited Bhutan back in 1953, and there's a reciprocal visit, on the invitation of a third king from India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, with the daughter Indira Gandhi ji. They came to Bhutan on the, riding on a yak, basically. We didn't have a motorable road by then. That was in 1958. And that was the very time where the groundbreaking ceremony of the first national highway from Phuentsholing, the bordering town with the state of West Bengal, and Thimphu was initiated. So that was back in 1958. So I think if you look into the history of our developmental activities, I think the policy that India is adopting right now, the neighborhood first policy, I think India has actually gone beyond that and really brought a lot of developmental activities. So I think India is not only the closest neighbor to Bhutan per se, but I think India is also the largest trading partner to Bhutan. And if you look into the import pattern, because as I mentioned earlier, Bhutan is largely an import driven. So we, like if you look into, I think we are seeing increasing trade deficit all, for past many years, I would say decades. And 93% of our imports are made from India. And if you look into Bhutan's export, which is substantially low as compared to the import that we are making, I would say 98% of our exports are going to India. So I think then in itself you can make out that the kind of the relationship that the two countries share. And one interesting fact I would like to make a mention here, that since Bhutanese neutral currency is pegged to the Indian rupee, if you look into the trend of the economic performance, the GDP pattern, you see like for past 2 decades, Bhutan actually follows the pattern of Indian economy. So we are a bit optimistic because now the World Economic Outlook report published in January 2023 indicates that advanced economies, the growth is downgraded. Emerging markets, emerging economies like India, I think because of the kind of resilience that Indian economy has, I think your GDP is not downgraded by significant figure. It's just downgraded as per the forecast of IMF. It's just downgraded from 6.8 to 6.1%, which is significant, I would say. I think your Indian economy is only going to grow. So for that matter, I think it doesn't mean that we're being complacent here, but looking at the historical trend of Bhutanese economic growth, which follows the Indian trajectory, I see that there definitely is going to be a spillover benefit and effect into our Bhutanese economy. So for that matter, I would again say that, I think beyond neighborhood first policy, I think our relationship, be it in terms of trade, be in terms of culture, be in terms of anything you talk about, I think it is only going to grow from strength to strength. And of course, I would like to again take this opportunity to thank the people of India, the government of India, because we are the first recipient of the vaccine, the Covishield, 250 doses back in 2020 through that Never First policy. And indeed, India has chartered your own flight to reach the vaccines and hand over to the people of Bhutan. That was a very momentous opportunity, and I would like to thank for that. Thank you very much.
And if I could turn to you, Honorable Finance Minister of Maldives, Mr. Ibrahim Amir, on the same question about India and the Maldives developmental partnership. How is it progressing?
Thank you. If somebody asked me what they can do to help the Maldives address the fiscal issues now and the debt sustainability issues that we face now, I always say, come to the Maldives, go to a resort and enjoy our hospitality. Because you are spending dollars there that addresses our our fiscal sustainability issues. And
Minister, you should invite the AED to hold its next session there.
Yes, we should do that. Now what we see is that actually Indian travelers share the number one market for the tourists who are coming to the Maldives. And we see a number of Bollywood stars also going to the Maldives, and it is acting as a good publicity for our tourism sector. So that is very important. The India and Maldives share a unique bond based on mutual respect, trust, and understanding that goes beyond simple geographical and historical and cultural ties. As the Honorable Minister, Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, there is a fundamental difference between the developmental projects that we are carrying with the Indian assistance. I believe that is that the developmental projects that we are carrying with Indian assistance is mainly geared towards future growth, which is very important. what are the developmental projects that are carried out right now. Number one, as mentioned by the minister, we are having a Greater Male connectivity project which will actually transform Maldivian economy. And it is also, we are also relocating our commercial port which is in Male to a nearby island which will connect this connectivity bridge, which will mean actually that will drive our economic growth in the years to come. And then we are also developing two international airports in the north, one in the north, one in the south. In the north, which is the Hanimado International Airport, which will have a capacity of around 1.8 to 2.1 million tourists a year. And when we do that, it will also mean that more investors go to the north, where actually we have much more beautiful islands than which is actually in the center where we have most of the resorts now. And also in the south, South Gain International Airport, again being developed with the assistance of line of credit facility from Exim, will have a capacity of around 1.8 million. So now we are a $6 billion economy, but when we do these international airports in the north and in the south, in a few years' time, let's say in 5-10 years, we are looking at not a $6 billion economy. I believe we are looking at, let's say, $15-20 billion economy. And also we have very important basic infrastructures, water and sanitation projects. When we came into this government in end of 2018, we had only around 30% of our country had proper water and sanitation projects. But now with the assistance of Indian Exim, we are currently having water and sanitation projects in all of the other 70% of the islands. So by the end of this year, we will, in all of the islands, we will have proper water and sanitation completed. So I believe these are very important projects, meaning that more economic activity can actually take place in these islands once these projects are completed. And the other thing is, I am very happy that most of these projects are carried out in a transparent manner. The pre-qualification processes happen in India, and then also there is a proper tendering process in Mali as well. So we have most of these developmental projects carried out with the assistance of Indian Exim. And also there are buyer's credit projects, social housing projects. At the moment, we are carrying out around 6,000 social housing projects are being carried out with the assistance of buyer's credit funding. So I believe that most of these projects will, once completed, will transform Maldives' economy from a $6-7 billion economy to a $15-20 billion economy. These projects are purely designed always growth in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to turn to the audience, but as we do that, and I do hope the microphones are ready, I cannot but ask Dr. Jayashankar, foreign policy has now gone down to the masses, largely because of social media, but also because communication has become so much easier. And you have become a kind of star in the eyes of the general public, not just here in Pune, but all over the world. So my question to you, sir, and is this, can we call this the Jayashankar doctrine of Indian foreign policy?
Not really. I think there's somebody who had already laid claim, and he happens to be my boss. And rightly so. Because, if there was every doctrine policy shift requires one inflection point that you need to capture in public mind. To me, it was the swearing-in ceremony in 2014. The fact that the fact that it even occurred to an incoming Prime Minister of India, saying, look, there's a change of guard, a big change, a very fundamental change happening in India, but let me now share it with my neighborhood. That, to me, actually showed neighborhood first. At that time, of course, I was not even in the ministry, I was in Washington. But to me, that was the inflection point, and then it's developed bit by bit.
So you're saying we can call it the Modi doctrine of Indian foreign policy. Let's go turn to the audience, and I see a number of hands up. I think what I'd request you to is identify yourself, tell us whom the question is aimed at or directed at, and try to be as brief as possible. I thought I saw Mr. Sudhir Mehta put his hand up. Could we have the mic here, please? And we will come to the others. We'll do a round of 3 questions and then, take answers to them and then see if we have time for more.
So thank you, Gautam. And first of all, thank you to all the speakers. I think as a Punekar, all of you spoke about the importance of an airport, which was fantastic to hear. But I'll ask my question.
I got that message.
Thank you, sir. I'll ask my question on what's a very important area, which is currency. I think one of the things that, at least as citizens, we noticed earlier this week, and I think this was a extremely important event, was the India-Singapore deal for the UPI, where now any Indian citizen or any Singapore citizen can send around 60,000 rupees a day between the two countries. Given that 20% of the world trade will come from India in the coming decades, does this really go towards a systematic shift towards our foreign exchange and currency policy? Because to a great extent, while we are beginning to be a more important part of world trade, we are really dependent on the dollar. Is this a first step where we are going to see that we can have all of these kinds of connections? And if that's the case, then I would say that's a very big positive, because with the diaspora all around the world, and then hopefully this transcends into something which is more economic. Would like to get your views on this, Dr. Jaishankar.
Let's take a next question, and I see a hand up here. Ambassador Karamuru from Brazil, do you have a question, sir? Here, please, in front, right in front. Aage hai, yahan pe. Can we have another microphone?
Maybe I should talk close to the microphone. Marcos Caramuru from Brazil, SEBRE. I see that the subtitle of this conference is Asia in the Emerging World Order. And one of the main features of the new order, of the emerging order, is the emergence of Asia as a leader. First, with a contribution to world growth, very significant, I would say, and this year is going to be very important. But with time, with its contribution to values, with ideas, with the new approaches to the world reality. Then I would like to listen from Minister Jaishankar and the other ministers as well. What's their vision of this new role of Asia as a leader in world reality?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. One more hand at the same table. Yes, please. Yes, sir.
Amit Paranspe, Pune International Center. I have a quick short question. You talked about our western neighbor. Can you talk a little about our northern neighbor and how our economic relationship may evolve in the coming years?
So that's a round of 3 questions, and maybe we can start with Dr. Jaishankar, if you can, because all 3 questions were aimed at you, but one was for the other minister.
I think the first question actually is in a way better answered by, remember, we have 2 finance ministers.
Yes,
here.
absolutely.
I'm just a humble foreign minister. So these guys are the serious guys in the business.
Yes.
To to me, as a very interested, a member of the government who obviously watches financial and digital financial issues move forward, what happened with Singapore was something very, very significant. But it's one step. This is a long, arduous road. I know people, it's in our nature to define in this respect very ambitious objectives that, one day the dollar's there and, when will the rupee internationalize to our point. But look at countries who are much bigger than us, who economically, who have actually been challenged. They've made a lot of progress. I mean, in a way, it relates to the last question. They've made a lot of progress, but it's much easier said than done. And to me, I mean, I have two finance ministers here, but what has the last year shown us? The last year has shown us that whenever the world is in trouble, the world heads towards the dollar. I mean, that's also a reality that, but maybe the first question, you gentlemen need to come in and then I could, look at the other two.
So let me turn to the Honorable Finance Minister of the Maldives, Mr. Ibrahim Amir. If you could go first on that question about, about the development.
How do you see the idea of a UPI arrangement with Singapore? How would it apply to you?
And also Ambassador Karamuru's question about what is Asia bringing to the table as, world economic growth continues higher and upward.
Thank you very much. Maldives is very much reliant on our imports. We actually import maybe more than 99% of all our goods are imported from abroad, and a large percentage of that imports also do come from India as well. We have been in talks with Reserve Bank of India as well with regard to rupee card, rupees settlement, so that it is all the more important because right now we also face the issue of depleting US dollar reserves as well because of the increase in oil prices. So that discussion is progressing with Reserve Bank of India and our central bank as well. We are also very much involved in that. And currently also the National Bank of Maldives also are involved in this. And not only the rupee settlement, but also we are in talks with other countries where we import heavily with regard to how we can actually have our local currency and their currency settlement. So that is already in progress. Hopefully we can achieve that as soon as possible. And the other thing is with regard to how Asia can help in this emerging world order. And I believe even now we are doing that because if you look at the recent IMF reports as well, it says that the world economic growth is actually led by countries like India, like China, and other countries in Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, and other countries. So I believe we are already doing that. And while we are doing that, as I mentioned, it is very important that we also address the issues of climate financing so that our countries like Maldives can actually benefit from that. Thank you.
Linpo, could I turn to you to answer those same questions, please?
Thank you. I think more than an answer, I think probably mine would be kind of the suggestion. I would say my own the submissions on this two pertinent questions raised by two gentlemen. On the UPI, that government of India has initiated with Singapore. I see this as a very welcoming kind of an initiative, and I only pray that if this could be rolled out further, because I see that this is a way forward for in this 21st century, basically to ease the way of doing business, and as well because see the case in Bhutan, because we have a lot of difficulties for our Bhutanese diaspora, those who are living abroad, in terms of sending back the money. And it has a lot of restrictions. Every country has their own financial restriction regulations. So for that matter, especially in the United States as well in Australia, people are facing a lot of difficulties to send back the money. So for that matter, I see that the financial technologies like this kind of the UPI and all these things is only going to, not only in India, but especially the neighboring countries, we see that there's an opportunity for us to leverage and write on that platform in near future. As such, in Bhutan, especially for the Indian tourists and for ease of making a payment and transfer of money, we have already adopted and launched together with the Honorable Finance Minister of India. We have already launched RuPay card and BHIM in Bhutan. So I think these are all kind of a welcoming gesture. But the specific question that you have asked, I think I'll still leave this up to Honorable Minister here. On the second question, Asia and the emerging world order, I see my response will be same as spelled out by the Maldivian Finance Minister, Honorable Finance Minister, because it's only the figure, from the figure we can make out that India contributes almost 9.2% to global GDP. So this in itself shows that I think the trend has already reversed, and the whole order has already changed. And I could, with a lot of pride, I can say that it's only going to grow stronger. And for me, I see that the theme is very, very pertinent, because it is already, it's already imperative that, India combined with China almost contributes around 50% to global GDP. This in itself shows, forget about remaining the Asian countries, but I think two countries massively contributes to global GDP. So I think the whole order has already changed probably. I think this need not be qualified, this need not even qualify to be a tagline basically. It has already reversed the order. Thank you very much.
Let me respond to the world order question. I mean, there's no doubt, I think all of us at the, on the podium, I think on the floor as well, know that the role of Asia, the salience of Asia will increase. But I think there are two cautions we need to keep in mind. One, Asia is growing because Asia has been global. What we should not fall for is this kind of Asia for Asians. That kind of rhetoric is very misleading. It kind of appeals to a very primitive chauvinism in people. It actually has a very deep strategic intent behind it. And Asia will grow, will have a greater role provided Asia remains consciously global. The second point there is also Asia itself must strive to be more multipolar. That when we speak about a multipolar world, which means there are more countries, the diversity is better expressed, it should not be that Asia is less multipolar and the world is then expected to be more multipolar. World will be multipolar, world will be diverse and democratic only when Asia will be diverse and democratic. And that responsibility of making Asia multipolar particularly falls on India. The question on China. I do believe that the economic challenges presented by our relationship with China are really very, very serious, very formidable. I'm not entirely convinced that they've been addressed in that manner, not now, over the last 20 years. I want to remind some of you that in fact in 2006, we could actually even have contemplated an FTA with China. This was a goal which was agreed to between the governments of India and the governments of China when President Hu Jintao, am I correct, was visiting India. At that time, it looked something which was reasonable because it was an optimistic era of the relationship. It was a time when people felt that, Chinese presence would grow, our presence would grow, somewhere we would find maybe not a perfect balance, but some kind of balance. It was predicated on the fact that there would be reasonable market access to the Chinese economy. And in fact, I remember meeting Mr. Narayan Murthy in Shanghai when he too came with that expectation in mind. The reality has turned out to be something very, very different. And in fact, what happened was not just unequal market access, there was very little northward market access. We actually saw migration of business, not migration of company, migration of business, meaning the businesses which used to be done in India actually migrated to China, obviously under Chinese ownership. And the result of what we see today, the very, very severe imbalance, is an accumulation of all of that. Now, it's very, this, by the way, becomes a very, sometimes, I'm trying to find a polite adjective here, let us say a dumbed down political debate. It isn't. It's a very serious matter. And the responsibility here is not just of the government. It's an equal responsibility of businesses. If we have today a huge imbalance of trade with China. Now, again, anybody doing trade will not have a problem with an imbalance per se. It is nobody's contention, unless you are Donald Trump, that every trade account must be accurately balanced. Economics doesn't work that way. But when there is this kind of imbalance, where comparative advantages do not matter at all, where there are a lot of non-market factors at play, that production is determined by non-market factors, but you're giving entry on the basis, giving market access, assuming that this is some kind of market competition. So there's something fundamentally flawed here. And as I said, a lot of it depends on Indian corporates. That Indian corporates haven't developed the kind of backwards vendor supplies and components and parts and ingredients and intermediates that should be supporting us. And again, you could argue maybe the government didn't do enough. I think that's a reasonable point. So we are today trying to change this. When you look, when you say Atmanirbhar Bharat, it's not a slogan. It's actually a messaging to industry, to people saying, please, what you can source from India, you have an obligation to source, not as a moral obligation. Our national security is a threat if we have this kind of massive external exposure. And we saw that very graphically during COVID. So today when we do PLI, production linked incentives, the purpose of it is to bring back, we have to create a manufacturing culture in this country. Those who say, we should focus on services. Yes, services have a role. We may be good at it. But a major economy cannot be that service-centric and neglect manufacturing. And those who, I've been very blunt about it. Those who do down manufacturing, they are actually damaging this country's strategic future. That we cannot build the deep strengths. We cannot build the national security basic requirements unless we have, a significant industrial capacity. I know I'm saying this at Pune, which is very much at the heart of this culture. But I do think if there is a big China debate to be had in this country, it needs to be actually focused on what is it we should do to rectify what is clearly a very unsatisfactory state of affairs?
Thank you very much, all three ministers. We have run out of time, in fact, exceeded our time. So let me bring this inaugural session to an end. Please join me in applauding the three ministers. Thank you very much for your presence here in Pune. Also, as a token of our appreciation, we'll be gifting you a book by the Pune International Center on how India should approach the China challenge, how India should approach the China question. I hope the government does take some of these suggestions on board. But thank you very much, all three ministers. Thank you for being with us. I'll just request them to bring in the gifts. Hello. Finally, we have to have a group photo here of all the speakers. May I invite the President of the PIC, Dr.